I'm Mark.
And I'm Josh.
And this is Alter Ego Comics TV, episode number 77. And this week for comics is one of the most satisfying weeks. We've been talking about this the last day or so with customers and amongst ourselves. The most satisfying weeks for comics that I can remember in a long time. Both of us read a lot of books every week, and the law of averages states that there will be a number that we really don't care for, that we didn't really like. But this week, that really wasn't the case. I liked everything I read. So it was very difficult coming up with a list of things to talk about this week because all of it is really, really good. But we have to start things off with Before Watchmen, Minutemen #1, written and drawn by Darwin Cook. And if you're a comic book fan, you're aware of the Before Watchmen controversy. Whether the Watchmen characters should be touched by anyone other than Alan Moore, who touches many characters in inappropriate ways. But I was kind of indifferent to it. And the bottom line with me is, with comics and with dealing with these characters, as long as the story's good, then all bets are off as far as I'm concerned. I don't want to get into the ins and outs of whether Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons got gypped by DC Comics. You can go back and say, well, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster got gypped, and Steve Ditko got gypped, and Jack Kirby got gypped. And if you spend all that time focusing on the negativity of it, you miss out on the creativity and the fun of comics, which is, again, for me, if the story works, then that's great. And I was reserving judgment on Before Watchmen until I read the first issue, and now that I have, the story works. It was a very entertaining read. Darwin Cook's artwork is just awesome. He's the guy who did DC Comics' The New Frontier. He's doing the Parker adaptations over at IDW. And the story feels familiar, but also feels fresh. There are elements, of course, that you're going to recognize from the Watchmen graphic novel or the individual issues that came out in the mid-'80s. But it was enough to keep me interested. There's a whole lot of bang for your buck with this one. Lots of story, lots of great artwork. And then you've got a backup story by Len Wein and the guy that did the art on the original backup story, whose name is escaping me. John Higgins, maybe? I don't know. The guy from Magnum P.I., Higgins. I'm old. And but anyway, Before Watching Minutemen was a big surprise for me in that it was really, really good, but also apparently a big surprise or highly anticipated for everybody else because we're nearly sold out of the damn thing. In one day, we've sold through almost the entire order that I placed, and I thought I placed a pretty comfortable order, a pretty decent order. So we will have more. It might take a week or two to get more in, but you should hurry in if you want one. Comments?
Before Watchmen was good. No,
the end.
This was actually my favorite part of the original Watchmen. The idea that you have these characters that so closely resemble ones that we're already familiar with. Captain Atom is Dr. Manhattan, and Night Owl is Blue Beetle, etc., etc. They're basically the Charleston characters. And Charlton, not Charleston. Charlton Heston. The Charlton characters. And the fact that we saw them at that moment in time, but then we also saw this back history that was kind of created out of nothing for this previous team, and that was my favorite part of the original graphic novel, and that's what this is all about. This is Hollis Mason before as he's getting ready to write his memoirs under the hood, and you see so many little things, little almost Easter eggs to the Watchmen series. You see him moving into the apartment where we know from Watchmen he's going to get killed. You see him holding the statue that ultimately becomes his murder weapon. So it's great to add to that legacy and at the same time, make little nods to it, and it's just so much fun. And this is absolutely where Darwin Cook belongs. New Frontier, this kind of classic Rocketeer era punching superheroes is what he does best, and his art style really complements it, and it's just so good. So far, Before Watchmen is 1 for 1. All good.
And if things go the way DC has planned, we will see a new issue of Before Watchmen every week for the next 35 weeks. There are 7 or 8 series of varying lengths, either 4 or 6 issues. So every week for the next 35 weeks, we're going to have an issue of Before Watchmen.
We'll get a little advent calendar. Every week one pops out. Oh, it's Silk Spectre!
Staying in the land of controversy, we have Earth 2, #2, written by James Robinson, artwork by Nicola Scott. And we both loved Earth 2 #1 when it came out last month, and then the media picked up on the fact that in Earth 2 #2, Alan Scott, the original Green Lantern from the 1940s, was going to come out as a gay man. And that's stealing a lot of the thunder from this series, which is just a great comic on its own. We're not going to debate whether this was a good thing or a bad thing, or whether it made sense or not. But story-wise, if you're looking for a great comic book, Earth 2 fills that description, all across the board, from story to art. And one of the great things about Earth 2 is that it's perfect for longtime fans and new readers alike, and that's really what DC needs to do, and Marvel, and any of these publishers that are using characters that have been around for decades. They need to keep them fresh. They need to make them accessible to new readers, and it would be stupid for them to do the New 52 coming up on almost a year ago and not make this series accessible to some of those people who came on board for the first time. So we're seeing the creation of Jay Garrick as the Flash. We're seeing Alan Scott be gay. Now we're seeing Alan Scott will eventually become Green Lantern.
We assume.
We assume, yes. But the way that they're doing it makes sense. It has appeal to me as a longtime comic reader, and I'm sure it's going to appeal to new readers as well, because you don't need to know anything about these characters to pick up this series.
Absolutely, and I loved what they did with the New 52, but it almost feels like Earth 2 is not necessarily what they should have done, but it's like taking it to the next level. Because Batman and Green Lantern didn't see a lot of change in the rollover to the New 52. Superman, Teen Titans saw some more background. But the Earth 2 changes they've made are radical, and it really works for me. We're seeing the birth of characters in a different way, but they're still true to the original personality. See if the world goes a little differently, how a hero becomes a villain, or how things are just different. It's so exciting to see these old characters that I know and have decades of history with in a new light, to see them kind of reborn in a way where I don't know what's going to happen next. Alan Scott could die in this issue. I have no idea. There's all bets are off, and it's just really exciting to see what they're doing with Earth 2. I mean, the first issue they killed off 3 superheroes and sent 2 more spiraling through space, as well as a whole pantheon of gods that died. So I mean, literally, the stakes have never been higher, and it's just so much fun.
And this is James Robinson at his best. We were talking about Darwin Cook on Before Watchmen. This is what James Robinson was meant to do at DC Comics. He kind of stumbled a little bit when he was doing Justice League towards the end, before we got to the New 52. But he's at home with this, and as far as I'm concerned, he can write this book until the cows come home.
Yeah, and he's best known for his work on Starman, which was sort of like this. It was an updating of a classic JSA character, and a lot of the old JSA cast made appearances in Starman in slightly altered or interesting ways. And yes, this is what Robinson does best.
Next up, we want to talk about Harbinger #1, written by Joshua Dysart with art by Kerry Evans, and I am dumbfounded that I'm talking about Valiant Comics and how much I like them in this episode, or at the shop, or wherever. Valiant was around in the early '90s, and unfortunately contributed to the almost death of the comic book industry from oversaturation and speculation and lots of bad things, gimmicky covers, but they have a very loyal following. And the stories may have been great back then. I read very little Valiant back in the 90s, but I approached these with an open mind, both X-Men of War last month and now Harbinger this month, and they're releasing 1 new title every month. They've only got 4 or 5 that they've announced so far, but they're getting top-notch writers, top-notch artists on these series, and I thoroughly enjoyed Harbinger #1. It's another instance where you don't have to know anything about the character to pick it up and enjoy it. You don't have to have read the previous series, the previous incarnations of Harbinger, and it felt like an image book. You have a character who can read people's minds, who hears people's thoughts, and he's a teenage kid who is kind of using that to his advantage, not the way a superhero would. So this kid is at this point not a hero. He's just trying to get by and trying to survive. It's a world similar to ours, but not our world. And again, it's just a really solid first issue, as X-Men of War #1 was, and we'll get to X-Men of War #2 down the road here. But I was not expecting to be this excited about Valiant Comics, and they've proved me a believer. I'm a believer in Valiant Comics. Did you read that?
I did.
Okay.
It was good, but you said mostly everything I had to say about it.
Yeah.
It was cool to see a professor, like a young Professor X, almost like in First Class, where he doesn't have the same moral strictures, but he's still essentially infinitely powerful within the minds of people. And I really like the way they portrayed that in the comic, the way they you see the effects of his powers and being on the run from the government and with his crazy buddy, and it was cool. It was a good first issue. I was surprised as well.
tell us about The Walking Dead.
The Walking Dead, Volume 16 coming out this week. That's Volume 16. 16 volumes of Walking Dead on the shelves at Alter Ego Comics. And you've all been waiting for it to come out. And the very cool thing for you right now is, once you get 16, the next 2 issues of the story, which are issues 97 and 98 respectively, are already in stock. So if you get 16, you're pumped, you say to yourself, I don't want to wait 6 months for more Walking Dead. We've got 2 issues on the shelf right now you can go pick up, and then you can pick it up monthly as it comes out, and you won't have to go for 6, 8, 9 months at a time between Walking Dead fixes. You can get it now. And that is all. Walking Dead's awesome.
Spinning out of Walking Dead, we'll talk about another series by the creator of The Walking Dead, Robert Kirkman, Thief of Thieves. Thief of Thieves number 5 came out this week. It's the character, the universe was kind of plotted by Robert Kirkman and has been written by Nick Spencer of Morning Glory's fame. And we've talked about Thief of Thieves almost every month since the series started, and it's just really good. It's good comics. And we mentioned last month it's been picked up as a pilot for AMC, so we may see it as a TV show soon. It definitely has the feel of an episodic television show. And this issue was awesome. We're seeing more backstory of the main character. We're seeing his relationship with his team, and how things haven't gone the way that he's always wanted them to, and his relationship with the cop that is just a great addition to the Thief of Thieves universe. There's just so much to love about this, and it's great. We've said many times, and I'm stumbling for words now. I don't know what it is. I'm hungry, perhaps. But the great thing about Image is the variety of genres that we're seeing from that company. I mean, they're doing great comics across multiple genres. So this is not a superhero book. This is not a sci-fi book. This is not fantasy. This is a book that could take place, characters that could take place in the real world. And it's great to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Thief of Thieves has a great feel to it because it certainly evokes, your classic film noir, your heist movies, stuff like Ocean's 11, and it does it in a way that you don't usually see in comics. Like Kick-Ass was famously optioned for a movie before the first issue was even on stands. But this book actually reads like a movie. It's very cinematic in the way it reveals things. It does one-ers and shots, and you almost feel the way it cuts together. It's very smooth. And it's very stylish. It's just very cool to see the way they bring it out. And on top of that, the main character, Redmond, is just super awesome. He's just too cool to believe. And so Kirkman and Spencer knocking it out of the park with Thief of Thieves once again this month.
And we do have all 5 issues on the shelf, so it's not too late to get on board with this and check it out. Back to Valiant, Exo Man of War number 2 has made my list again. The first issue made my list last month, and this issue was great. Again, we're dealing with characters that were around in the year 400-ish, Visigoths who were fighting the Romans, and some of them have been kidnapped by aliens. And that sounds kind of corny, but when you read it, it's cool. And so we're seeing what happened to these guys who've been kidnapped, and they're kind of being put into slave labor camps. And many, many years passed. I mean, these guys have been, forced into labor for many, many years, and they're finally going to get together and revolt against these aliens, led by the main character that we're introduced to in the first issue, Eric. And so we're seeing some of his backstory. We're seeing him act as kind of a Spartacus-type character, getting the prisoners riled up. And then we see the suit. We see the famous Exo Man of War suit / armor that many people are familiar with the look. Joe Quesada was the artist on this series way back in the 90s, and I don't know where it's going next. It's Conan meets Conan meets Cowboys and Aliens in a way. You've got the barbarian aspect of the Visigoths, and then you've got the aliens, and you don't know who they are and what they're doing, and they're very weird. It's like they worship plants. It's but the combination of the writing and the artwork on this make it one of my top picks this week. And again, I'm looking forward to each new Valiant book now because they're 2 for 2 with me. Creator-owned Heroes number 1 from Image is a book that I highly recommend this week. It's also in the category of most bang for your buck. It's a $3.99 comic, but you get 2 different stories. You get an interview with Neil Gaiman. You get editorials by Steve Niles and Jimmy Palmiotti. Basically, this is Palmiotti's version of Tales to Astonish, or Tales of Suspense, which Marvel published back in the 60s, and it was their book for introducing new characters to see whether they would stick or not. Iron Man was first introduced in Tales of Suspense. Ant-Man was first introduced in Tales to Astonish. I think the Hulk was too.
No, Hulk had a 6-issue mini and then went back to Tales to Astonish.
And that's why Josh is here. But it's a place for independent creators to try out new creations, and both of them in this book are awesome. You've got American Muscle by Steve Niles, who is most known for 30 Days of Night. His current series at IDW is Frankenstein Alive, and it just writes great stuff. He did Mystery Society, which both of us really loved, and he loved too. And in the editorial, you kind of find out that he's sad that it's not continuing, and it's not his choice. But it's kind of a post-apocalyptic world. There's something, and I don't want to give too much away, that has kind of contributed to the downfall of society, and you have this group of people that you don't know much about, and they're trying to find a haven, and they've been told that the West Coast is the place to go, is the best coast, and they get there and they find out it ain't true, and then we see some monsters. So it's got a very much a Walking Dead feel to it. You've got kind of a ragtag group of people that are trying to survive versus this stuff. Was really, really good.
Yeah, I thought it had kind of like a 70s action movie feel.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, you've got the cool muscle cars that are all a little older style, and you've got the sort of the Omega Man, apocalyptic era stuff. Very, very cool. I felt like Steve McQueen should be in it somewhere.
The other book is Trigger Girl 6 by Jimmy Palmiotti and Justin Gray, with awesome artwork by Phil Noto. And I should mention that Phil Noto did the inking over Darwin Cook in Before Watchmen. So Phil Noto is a busy guy. And he's awesome, which is why he's so busy. But Trigger Girl 6 was a really cool story. It's kind of a female, genetically engineered, possibly assassin. It appears to be an assassin that we don't know a whole lot about. We see her kind of hatched from this lab, and then all of a sudden she's out in the world taking on a military target, and it's great. The dialogue is great. I mean, Palmiotti and Gray have been on our top list of creators for many years now, and it's great to see them play around in their own universe. When they did Tattered Man, when they did Trailblazer, the time travel thing.
Time Bomb?
Oh, they did Time Bomb, yeah, which was awesome.
The Ray, Jonah Hex.
The list goes on and on. These guys are so consistent, and Trigger Girl 6 is another one of those where I just can't wait to see what happens next. And it's a great combination. I mean, that group of Palmiotti, Gray, and Noto created this awesome introduction to Trigger Girl. So, creator-owned heroes, you should check it out if you're a big fan of indie comics. Even if you're not, these stories are great. You've got kind of a horror action movie, and then or a horror action story. Sorry, movies, comics, they all are the same to me. And kind of an espionage, sci-fi type thing with Trigger Girl 6. They were awesome. And finally, Avengers VS X-Men number 5 came out this week. The series is still going very strong. Many of you are reading this, and I'm glad that Marvel has a hit on their hands. I'm glad that this story is infinitely better than Fear itself. And basically, you know the story. It's Avengers versus X-Men. They're battling over the mutant Hope and waiting to see what the Phoenix Force is going to do. And I will tell you that something happens in this issue that came out of left field, and I didn't expect it. We will not give the spoilers away, but Marvel is doing the right thing here. They're keeping readers interested, and this is actually the end of the first chapter. I was mistaken. If you look at the series, it's a 12-issue series, so I assumed that issue 4 would have been the last part of the first chapter, but they're telling us that issue 5 is the last part of the first chapter, and it feels like the end of the first act of a 3-part play or 3-part story. I liked it.
No, I loved it. I thought Avengers vs. X-Men is really defying my expectations, both by being good and by, Avengers vs. X-Men, you expect a lot of punching, and there's plenty of punching, but it's very interesting the way the story is structured, the rhythm that they're getting with the fighting and the breaking. You see the strategies on both sides. It's really a complex story, and they're doing a great job. At the end of the previous issue, I believe we saw the key that the Phoenix was arriving. And the cover will tell you the Phoenix arrives this issue, and it's just so super cool. Like Mark said, it comes out of left field. It's so cool, and I like the way it's interacting with all of the tie-in books. Like Avengers Academy was sort of centrally tied into this, and Uncanny X-Men this week. Uncanny X-Men, you see things that actually portray what happened in this book, in the main AVX5, in a new light. But you don't need to. I mean, it's there if you want to read it and check it out if you like those characters, but it's not a must-read. And they're doing a crossover the way a crossover should be done, and I hope that other people take note, and maybe they take note, write it down so they can do it again next time. But yes, AVX is just rocking our world.
And again, we have all 5 issues plus the 0 issue on the shelf. So if you've waited, if you're not familiar with this, if this is your first time watching one of our shows, come on into the store. We've got every issue of the series on the shelf, so you can start from there. And if you saw the Avengers movie and you're looking for something cool to pick up, and we've seen a lot of people do that, a lot of people who haven't read comics in a long time are coming into the store because of Avengers vs. X-Men, or they went to see the movie, the Avengers movie, and they're looking for some place to start. This is a great place to start. So a great week for comics, and next week looks to be huge too. We've got new issues of Saga and Mind the Gap. Was Saga on the end?
Yeah,
oh,
Saga.
No, we don't. Sorry,
No,
not a new issue. It's a reprint of issue number 1. Sorry. But we've got Mind the Gap. We've got the new part of a new Batman issue with the Night of Owls.
The new Massive by Brian Wood, which is a creator-owned series. The one in space with the Planet of Junk. Planetoid.
Yeah, I mean, and this is kind of a...
Saucer Country.
It's Saucer Country.
Awesome books.
Kind of a side note, but if you look at the Image Comics, in every Image comic they have a page that shows all of their series that are coming out that month. And I was looking at that as I was reading my books this week, and we're stocking a very high percentage of those, which if you would have asked me or told me a year ago or 2 years ago that we would be stocking that many Image comics and so many of them would be awesome, I would have said no way. I wouldn't have believed you. So this really is the year of Image Comics. I'm just bringing that up because it was off the top of my mind. So flip through Image, you see that ad, you'll find almost every book at Alter Ego Comics. So continue with questions, comments in the space below. We appreciate you guys watching and tuning in every week, and share this with your friends. If you've got friends that are into comics, send them a link to our videos, or if you have friends that might be interested in comics, send them links to the videos, and hopefully we don't make them run away screaming. So until next time, we'll see you.